Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Welcome to Cineversary, a podcast that celebrates a milestone anniversary of a masterful work of cinema. Every month we send happy birthday wishes to a different film currently observing a joyous jubilee. We regard that as anything from a 20th all the way up to a 100th anniversary. This, as ever, is your devoted host, Eric Martin, creator of the Cineverse blog and moderator of the weekly Cineverse film discussion group. Hey, if you have just discovered our program, we welcome you. If you're a regular listener, we are, of course, delighted to have you back. 75 years ago, RKO Pictures released a crown jewel in the canon of film noir that many regard as the finest in the genre. Helmed by a director known primarily for crafting creative horror B-films, Jacques Tourneur, this picture helped catapult the careers of Robert Mitchum, Kirk Douglas, and Jane Greer. Of course, we're talking about Out of the Past, which deserves plenty of kudos in the present for its narrative construction, its stylized dialogue, its memorable performances, and its exquisite lighting design, among other facets. Premiering back on November 25th, 1947, Out of the Past continues to enthrall audiences and serve as a textbook example of classic noir to modern generations. Joining me this time around will be the absolute perfect guest for the occasion. He's the founder and president of the Film Noir Foundation, author of numerous books, including Dark City, The Lost World of Film Noir, and longtime host of Turner Classic Movies' Noir Alley. Yes, we are talking about Eddie Muller, who last joined us 3 years ago to examine another noir that was also celebrating its diamond anniversary at the time, Double Indemnity. Eddie and I will carefully navigate through this classic film's thick cigarette haze and dark labyrinth of double crosses to examine why Out of the Past stands the test of time, how it's unique among noir works, and why it's worth celebrating 75 years later. But before we descend into the shadows of the past, let's bring to light some of the facts behind the production and reception of this month's film, per Wikipedia. Out of the Past, also known as Build My Gallows High in the UK, is a 1947 film noir directed by Jacques Tourneur and starring Robert Mitchum, Jane Greer, and Kirk Douglas. The film was adapted by Daniel Mainwaring using the pseudonym Jeffrey Holmes from his 1946 novel Build My Gallows High, also written as Holmes, with uncredited revisions by Frank Fenton and James M. Cain. Its complex, fatalistic storyline, dark cinematography, and classic femme fatale garnered the film critical acclaim and cult status. In 1991, the National Film Preservation Board at the Library of Congress added Out of the Past to the United States National Film Registry of culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant films. The movie was produced by RKO Pictures, and the key personnel, Tourneur, cinematographer Nicholas Musaraka, actors Mitchum and Greer, along with Albert S. D'Agostino's design group, were longtime RKO collaborators. Although the studio focused on making B-films during the early 1940s, the post-World War II Out of the Past was given a comparatively lavish budget. Today, Out of the Past is considered one of the greatest of all films noir. On Rotten Tomatoes, its certified fresh rating is 93%, earning an average critical score of 8.9 out of 10 and an audience score of 92%. Okay, so a theatrical trailer for this movie, well, apparently it hasn't survived the ages, but we can share with you a pivotal scene in the film that sets the proper mood, so let's give it a whirl right now, shall we?
When are you taking me back?
Is that why you kissed me?
No.
Whit didn't die.
He didn't?
No.
Then why?
He just wants you back.
I hate him. I'm sorry he didn't die.
Give him time.
You are taking me back.
There's no hurry.
I could have run away last night.
I'd find you.
Yes, I believe you would. You glad you did?
I don't know.
I am.
There was a little business, about $40,000.
I didn't take
How
it.
did you know it was taken?
It's what you meant. I don't want anything of his or any part of him.
Except his life.
I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know anything except how much I hated. But I didn't take anything. I didn't, Jim. Won't you believe it?
Baby, I don't care.
People know me as a guy who dots his I's and crosses his T's properly, so it's only fitting that I caution you at this time that, critical plot points and twists are going to be revealed in the conversation ahead. So if you've never laid eyes on Out of the Past and want to sidestep the spoiler talk that's coming, I think you, like Whit Sterling, know what to do.
I hate surprises myself.
We shift now to my conversation with Mr. Muller. It's my great pleasure to introduce the founder and president of the Film Noir Foundation, author of several books, including Dark City, The Lost World of Film Noir, and the host of Turner Classic Movies' Noir Alley. It's none other than Eddie Muller. Eddie, what a thrill it is to have you return to Cineversary. Welcome back.
It is very good to be back, Eric. Thank you for inviting me once again.
Oh, my pleasure, sir.
There must be an anniversary.
Yes, sir. There's a birthday afoot here. Another 75th anniversary, because the last time we talked, it was the diamond anniversary of Double Indemnity, a fantastic film noir. And I thought of you immediately when this current anniversary was coming up. But I'm just thrilled that we've got you back in the driver's seat to steer us securely around another classic of the genre, Out of the Past, Diamond Anniversary, 75th year. So, yeah, Eddie, what do you love about this movie, and why is this film important to you in any way?
Well, it's interesting that the two films that you've had me discuss on your program are probably, I'm not going to say probably, they are the two movies that I always cite as being definitive film noir. So when people say, oh, I've heard about this film noir, what is it exactly? I simply say, watch either Double Indemnity or Out of the Past. Those are like the ultimate examples of the form, if you want to call it that, instead of the genre. But it's just a fantastic movie. It pays off everything, by which I mean there are a couple of strains of noir that are most prominent for the average viewer, and those are detective stories and then really noir stories in which the protagonist is the person who commits the crime, stuff like Double Indemnity and Postman Always Rings Twice.
Right.
And Out of the Past is special because it combines both of those things.
That's true.
It's a detective story that turns into a hardcore film noir in which the detective is not just the person brought in to solve the crime, but he is the person in the center of the crime who steps over the line and goes to the dark side, so to speak.
Well said. Yeah, I totally agree. For me, I would place this right on a list of the finest noir works behind Double Indemnity. That is my favorite. But this is probably a very close number two. I know there are a lot of contenders worthy of being mentioned in this conversation. But for me, anyway, Out of the Past, it crystallizes the essence of noir at its best. I think you summarized that well just a moment ago. So we are in simpatico here, sir. So how has Out of the Past stood the test of time? Why does this movie still matter, do you think, 75 years later? And why is it worth celebrating?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think one of the things that obviously keeps noir alive and fresh for a contemporary audience is the style. There was something about American style at mid-20th century that is timeless, and it's sort of the peak of what I will call the American style. And I think this film captures that very well. It's also, all these films from this period are sort of about the beginning of the culture's loss of innocence. And so that also ties into it. I'd say, yeah, if you're going, straight to hell, you might as well look good getting it, and everybody in this movie looks really good.
And sounds good too.
Yes, exactly. And quite honestly, I think one of the people you can't overstate his significance is Robert Mitchum.
Certainly.
I always say that in terms of popular culture, it was Humphrey Bogart who really sort of kick-started the acceptance of this move to darker material
Yeah,
when
most
he
definitely.
when he did, the Maltese Falcon and High Sierra and all this stuff, and he sort of made that dark pessimism sort of romantic.
Yeah, he's the face on the noir postage stamp, no question about that.
Yeah, exactly right. But Robert Mitchum did very much the same thing a few years later, because his style, his very hepcat, laconic, the world's going to hell, but I'm just going to shuffle along here, and that proved to be a very prescient attitude to adopt. And of course, as he now seems to have been many, many steps ahead of the rest of the culture. His kind of beatnik cool, his dope smoking.
Sure. Yeah, the off-screen stuff.
Hey, Bob, it's legal now in most states.
Wouldn't he be happy about that? Absolutely. I
Yeah.
definitely want to talk to you more about Robert Mitchum and what he brings to this performance in just a bit. But any other thoughts before I chime in on why this movie you believe is worth celebrating?
I also love it structurally.
Yeah.
Film noir is not an action-packed genre, right?
This is true.
I mean, these are psychological studies, and generally a downward spiral is the trajectory for these stories.
Right.
And that's what you get with this movie, where it's sort of everyone is circling the drain.
Oh, yeah.
But they, like I said before, but it's so incredibly stylish, and it's so well paced, and it really does give you this sense of, I mean, this is a cliche, and you hear people say this all the time, but wow, that movie, it was like a dream, or it was like a nightmare. But there are very, very few films that actually feel that way, because they have to sort of bump up right against the edge of conscious logic. I mean, because dreams aren't logical. And Out of the Past, for a movie made in 1947, comes so close to being a dream, where it's like, I really don't know if there's a plot here or not.
Especially the
It's
second
just-
half where things just go
Yeah,
off the
it's
wagon.
just happening. Stuff is just happening,
Right.
scene to scene,
Mhm.
and I don't consider that to be a fault in any way. I consider that to be one of the movie's great strong points.
Yeah, I would agree. So for my part, I think Out of the Past, perhaps it hews closest thematically and tonally to the central tenet of noir, that its characters are destined for doom based on fatal flaws like greed, betrayal, jealousy, desire. Put another way, Eddie, this film could be the truest expression of great noir and what makes noir great, thanks in large part to its fatalistic philosophy and pessimism. It's a lot of it is about setting the mood and the ambiance, if you will. I think it also still matters, courtesy, you laid this out just a moment ago, courtesy of its clever screenwriting construction, its hard-boiled wordsmithing, particularly the memorable dialogue and the one-liners. I'm going to cite, word for word, some famous quotes from this movie in a little bit. I'm sure you will in the course of our discussion as well. It's just delicious, the wordsmithing here. I think it's also stood the test of time partially because the title itself, Out of the Past, is one of the best in the genre. I mean, that's a title that's arguably most representational of the murky, ambiguous, and obscure nature of noir. It suggests this mysterious story in which bygone secrets or forgotten shadows, emerge to engulf the present day. And I'm sure you would agree here, but it's further worth celebrating for, yes, its clever, rhythmic, hard-boiled dialogue, the snappy patter, which is often a major part of the delicious fun of noir. In Out of the Past, Jeff gets most of the great lines, and if you really deconstruct it, it's so interesting, the rhythm and the pattern of it. These lines, they're typically delivered almost as a punchline to a setup line, as if he were the polished comedian opposite a straight man. And for proof, let's consider some of the following exchanges, if you will. Is there a way to win? Well, there's a way to lose more slowly. Don't you like to gamble? Not against a wheel. Don't you believe me? Baby, I don't care. Don't you miss me? No more than I would my eyes. I don't want to die. Neither do I, but if I have to, I'm going to die last. I lost her. She's worth losing. He was trailing you? Well, you don't go fishing with a .45 in your hand. Don't you see? You've only got me to make deals with now. Build my gallows high, baby. Time and again, these examples are just, it's wonderful of the back and forth nature of the setup and then the punchline with Jeff as almost a noir comedian. What do you make of that, Eddie? I'm sure you paid attention to this.
We can talk about the writing of this movie a bit if you wish, because it was not easy. It was not easy to get all that beautiful repartee and banter to the screen, but they pulled it off. And you got to give kudos to Robert Mitchum, because his ability to deliver those lines. If you can deliver a line that is that written and make it sound like you just tossed it off.
Exactly.
I mean, it always amazes me when, obviously Build My Gallows High was the title of the original book. It was not called Out of the Past.
That's right.
And I can't believe they left that in, because it's an impossible line of dialogue to say, right? I mean,
right.
It's like a normal human being cannot say that.
No.
Build my gallows high, baby.
So many of these lines are impossible. They're not plausible dialogue. They're not. These are things that people on the street would just not say to each other in 1947, let alone 2022.
Correct,
of course.
correct.
Yeah.
But as you pointed out, it is one of the things that keeps this so alive, and I appreciate you're mentioning that, because so many people get hung up on the visual allure of film noir, and they forget that there was a whole verbal thing that went on in the genre that absolutely is as much a reason for people sticking with it and continuing to love this as anything that you see. It's the dialogue. And I was on once before talking about Double Indemnity, which has absolutely incredible whip crack dialogue, and so does Out of the Past. It's just funny, because when I mentioned how important Mitchum was to this whole thing, I can't overstate that, because he was doing something entirely different, because his delivery was kind of slow. And coming out of the 30s, American culture was all about that screwball comedy, rat-a-tat dialogue. You had the Cagneys and the Robinsons,
Right.
and to some extent, Bogart himself. All those guys at Warner Brothers were told to be really fast. Pick it up, the pace of the times. And then Mitchum is the guy who took a long, slow drag of something and showed up on the set and was like, no, I'm not going to go any faster than I have to.
What a way to distinguish himself from the contemporaries you mentioned. And again, I mean, we could talk for a long stretch here just about Mitchum. We will mention him again, trust me, folks. But absolutely, everything you're saying is gospel. I also want to, just for a moment with you, I'm sure you've thought about this too, but I took a little while and I just sat and synthesized the names given to the characters, which I think are given with purpose and intent here. Because if you break it down, okay, bear with me here, Eddie. You think about Jeff, one of his surnames is Markham. And to me, that sounds like mark him.
Yeah.
And it suggests a marked man who's fated to die. Then you take Kathy Moffat, that last name, maybe it's a stretch. It makes me kind of think of Little Miss Muffet, who was visited by a spider. And Moffat herself becomes a spider woman femme fatale, right? The name Wit. Now that's spelled, I guess it's W-H-I-T. Not a name you hear very commonly today, but it conjures up its homonym, wit, W-I-T, implying a man of sharp intellect and facetiousness. Now, Maida, you remember the doppelganger female in the second half.
Yes, Rhonda Fleming.
Beautiful, yes. Rhonda Fleming. That word has multiple meanings. So in ancient Rome, Maida meant a column or a post, or a group of columns or posts, placed at each end of a racetrack to mark the turning places. Okay, maybe that's a throwaway. But the character of Maida also appears at and signifies a turning point in this story. And another meaning behind the word, in the world of chemistry anyway, it's actually a prefix designating the meta position in the benzene ring. Now, that's something you and I wouldn't necessarily know off the top of our head, but benzene itself is a toxic compound. So I think the screenwriters are winking at the audience a little here. Jeff's former partner, Fisher. Now, that's a name that makes me think he's fishing for something, or maybe he himself is fishy. Eels. Now that speaks for itself.
Leonard Eels.
A personality who operates in a slippery underworld, finds himself underwater and dead at the heels of Wit and his henchmen. Joe Stephanos, that last name, it sounds a bit like Mephistopheles or Mephisto, a demon or evil spirit. The kid, he's not given a name. The deaf and mute character, he's listed in the credits as the kid, right? He remains nameless.
Mm-hmm.
As if the dealings of these and other shady characters have left him speechless and deafened him with their evil intonations. He kind of stands as a silent cipher, merely observing what's happening. Yeah, do you make anything of the names?
What I make of the names is knowing what they were like in the original draft. It's a good thing they changed them, because the names of the characters in the original story aren't nearly as interesting. I wish I could remember them right now, but I distinctly remember, oh, this is a good idea to change all of these. But I think you're absolutely right. I mean, 9 times out of 10, when you're naming a character in fiction, you do it for the impression the name makes the first time you hear it. And, Whit Sterling is just a beautiful name for a gangster, with pretensions to being very Tony and uptown. Whit Sterling. I mean,
right, that last name is very telling as well. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then of course the name that Jeff adopts, Bailey, is just so. Who knows? I always wondered if it was somehow connected to George Bailey from It's a Wonderful Life, which
Makes
was
you think of it.
Which RKO had released the year earlier.
Yeah, the everyman, the Tom Hanks kind of, guy next door or something.
Yeah, well, in this case, the Jimmy Stewart guy next door.
I know. For 2022 audiences, I'm contemporizing it up. No, it's interesting just to kind of parse through those names, right? So let's talk for a moment here about the filmmakers and their collaborations. Now, what special qualities do director Jacques Tourneur, writer Daniel Mainwaring, and cinematographer Nicholas Musaraka bring to this picture? Because they are certainly worth talking about as well.
You bet. I mean, the thing I love about Jacques Tourneur is, since he is French, his father Maurice was a great film director, mostly in France. In France they call it mise en scène, which is like the director being responsible for everything that you see in the movie, right? He's in control of the environment in the scene. And that's what I mostly love about Tourneur as a director, and especially in this movie, is his complete command of everything. The art direction, the editing, all the visuals, the performances. He just brings it all together in a beautiful way. And to me, this is representative of the best of detective fiction. So when I was a kid and I started reading Hammett and Raymond Chandler and all these other fabulous detective story writers, the thing that really struck me about all of these was it didn't matter how the plot played out.
Okay.
What mattered was the movement. The movement through the plot, the constantly shifting scenes. These are like adventure tales, about the Pathfinder or something, and the search for the truth through all this murkiness and everything. Being able to render that scene by scene, keep the pace. Now you're in Bridgeport. Now you're in Lake Tahoe. Now you're in Mexico. And every one of those scenes, Tourneur is able to completely visualize that environment in a matter of seconds. And it's his direction is flawless in this movie. Also, obviously, have to give credit to Nicholas Musaraka, whose cinematography in this movie is really second to none. Yeah. I mean, everybody always cites John Alton as the greatest example of noir cinematography, and I will certainly give him his props. But this is a little different because it's just a little less bold. It's a little glossier, a little less bold than what Alton does, because Alton generally worked on lower budgets and was the highest paid guy on the crew. And Musaraka's doing this, and clearly Tourneur wants him to get the max out of every single scene, which he does. Whether it's an interior or an exterior, the stuff he shoots outdoors is brilliant.
Yes, agreed. Totally. I mean, what a great collaboration. Of course, I want to mention that Turner is primarily known for helming horror classics like Cat People, I Walk with a Zombie, later Curse of the Demon, Comedy of Terrors. But this work proves how savvy he could be working in other genres, right? It's unfortunate that this appears to be, I'm not a historian, but looking at the IMDb listing, for example, I think his only foray into noir.
He did a picture in 1957 called Nightfall.
Okay, thank you for correcting me.
That is really that is very interesting to watch after you watch Out of the Past.
Is it a true noir?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
It's just there's it was based on a book by David Goodis. But what's really interesting is it shows you the difference between 1940s film noir and 1950s film noir. So there is very much a visual difference. He's working with another great cameraman, Burnett Guffey. But there's great similarity in the movies in terms of the way they're structured and a man running from his past, all this kind of stuff. And it's really, they make a terrific double bill to just show you how within 10 years, Hollywood had changed and film noir was no longer looked the way it looked in the 1940s, but it was something different. And largely it was because the movies then, they knew they were going to sell them to television. And so they told the directors not to make the films as dark.
Gotcha.
Because early TV, the image would just bleed out if it was too dark. You couldn't see what was going on. So you can definitely see that change in the way he photographs Nightfall.
Well, now I have something to look forward to after this conversation, because I was worried this would be his only foray, like I said, into noir. But now I know better, and I will definitely have to check that out. But yeah, just to kind of summarize here, Out of the Past, it benefits, as do we, from the confluence of key artists working at top form, does it not? You think about Turner behind the wheel. You got the 3 M's that propel this vehicle, Mainwaring, Musaraka, and Mitchum. And this is a byproduct of great timing coupled with great talent. You look at Turner's work here. I'm just going to give a few examples of his work, his craftsmanship. He begins the film in an offbeat fashion, right? It's broad daylight. It's a POV shot from the backseat of the car. And then I think of just small but really impressive moments. That fantastic montage in Pablo's bar. If you recall, the camera sweeps left and it dissolves into another sweep left of a subsequent night. I just thought that was so clever, and it's such visual panache right there. I love the scene where Kathy and Jeff rush back to her place to escape the rain.
Oh, yeah.
This is a masterclass in sexual suggestiveness, right?
You
At
bet,
a time of
you
censorship,
bet.
because from off screen, Kathy throws a towel that knocks over a lamp, turning the room dark, as the wind blows open the front door, all in a matter of 2 seconds or less. And this is shorthand in the 40s for urgent and passionate sex that couldn't be shown. So it's just brilliant craftsmanship there.
And then also the drying of the hair.
Oh, yeah.
Their hair is wet and they dry each other's hair, which has tremendous suggestiveness.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's true.
Yes.
No question. The whole thing as a piece is just a real wink wink. It's also shrewd, right, to have the characters mention Kathy Moffat well before she appears on screen, which makes her entrance more impactful, especially after we hear Whit say earlier, when you see her, you'll understand better. And we certainly do. I mean, furthermore, it's impressive how the filmmakers weave the, symbolic visual props into this story. You think about the spider web-like netting we see on the beach, and the imposing gate at Whit's compound that make it look more like a penitentiary portal. These are like not-so-incidental objects that silently comment on the dangerous milieu that Jeff is caught up in. And we've seen this kind of symbolic approach before in other noirs, but again, I'm just tipping the hat to Turner and his collaborators here. I also admire how effectively the camera lingers unbroken on Kathy's radiant face during close-ups or more tightly framed kissing scenes with Jeff. And what's the purpose there? Well, it makes us see her from his gaze and better appreciate how entrancing she appears to him, because we really have to believe that for him to go back to her time and again, I mean, she is that magnetic, right?
Correct, absolutely. No, the close-ups of Jane Greer are stunning in this movie, and I want to just go back a second to touch on something you mentioned about her initial appearance in the film.
Yeah.
I was actually good friends with Jane towards the end of her life, and she always said that the way Jacques Tourneur directed her in this movie and handled her initial appearance is, she said, that was when I became a movie star. And she said that was because they handled me like, her reference was the way they would talk about Alan Ladd in a movie before he showed up. And then by the time he showed up, he was this impressive, almost mythological figure. And she said, when he's really just this little guy in a white suit, you know.
Yeah, right.
And she saw
That's great.
saw herself very much the same way. She goes,
Interesting.
I'm just this, skinny legged little girl in this white dress with a big hat. But the way Tanur directed it, you would think that, some mythological goddess is swooping into the cantina, And it's also, her character is very interesting because Kathy Moffat is the least likely name for a femme fatale ever. It's such a plain Jane kind of thing. Hi, Kathy Moffat. Hi, she's a straight A student, that Kathy Moffat. But you do sense that she is something else because of the effect that she has on these guys. And you're absolutely right when you talk about, Musaraka showing us her through Mitchum's eyes in those close-ups, and how in awe he is of her beauty.
No question. Now, many people believe this was a B movie because it was made by RKO, a studio known in the mid-40s for producing pictures on a tighter budget. But the evidence shows that the opposite is true, right? That Greer and Mitchum were being positioned as rising stars, that Kirk Douglas's talents were lent from another studio, that noir scribe heavyweight James M. Cain was enlisted for script doctoring. Any comment here, just in terms of, this myth that may have persisted that this is some B movie noir?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, it was what the studio would call a nervous A. They were giving the producers, like Warren Duff, who was one of the producers, was certainly a veteran, but he was mostly a screenwriter, and he hadn't yet, made his mark as a producer. And Tanur was relatively fresh out of the B trenches. You'd mentioned that he worked with Val Lewton, and that's where he really cut his teeth, understanding how to get the maximum out of what RKO was giving him budget-wise. But you're absolutely right. I mean, Jane Greer had just made They Won't Believe Me at RKO with Joan Harrison. And she was sort of Joan Harrison very politely put her name above the title on that movie, which was a first for Jane. And so it was kind of positioning her as this coming star.
Okay.
And that was true of all the players in the film. So you're really capturing lightning in a bottle with this movie. Everybody is bringing the A game because they're seeing this as their step up to the big leagues, right?
Yeah.
It certainly was not a B picture. RKO did not release it as a B picture. The difference at that time was that A pictures were bigger budgeted movies and they played the top half of double bills, whereas B's were always genre pictures. They were made for less money in the B unit at the studio, and they were released to fill out the bottom half of double bills. Well, Out of the Past was released as an A picture. Even when it was re-released later on, it was still the top half of the double bills and reissues. So it was never considered to be just a B movie.
Yeah. No, thank you for pointing that out. I think that's important for audiences to understand that distinction a bit. So is Out of the Past innovative or different in any way, Eddie, especially compared to previous noir films?
I don't know if it's innovative in the sense that, to me, it's like the film that pays off a lot of the ideas that other people had done, perhaps with less dexterity. I mean, we've talked about the structure of the movie and it being sort of interwoven flashbacks, right? You're at a certain point in the dream, if you will, you do sort of lose track of which one of these story threads is now. Right? And what is his memory, and because it does kind of wind around, right? I mean, generally in previous noir films like Double Indemnity or Mildred Pierce or something, I mean, it starts as a flashback and then you get back to the flashback at the end of the movie. Out of the Past is different because you come out of the flashback in the middle of the movie.
Yeah, it's in medias res how it begins.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know if it's innovative as much as it integrated all of these ideas in terms of the structure, in terms of the fallen hero, the femme fatale, the this new kind of organized crime figure that wasn't really that prominent until the 40s, when they were, they're more upscale gangsters than hoodlums, like you saw in the 1930s. Anyway, it just pays everything off.
Yeah, totally agree. We were talking earlier about Turner. He's shooting in the light of day, a lot of these scenes. You don't associate day scenes with noir very often. Many noirs, they prominently showcase nighttime scenes in gritty urban jungles using high contrast lighting that create oodles of dark shadows. Interestingly, this film features, as I said, plenty of daytime scenes in bright, sunny settings, including bucolic outdoor locations. Very quickly, I'm going to read you a quote here. This is by Bright Lights Film Journal critic Gary Morris. He said that director Jacques Tourneur follows Hitchcock's approach in finding terror in the everyday, in this case, the majestic backdrops of Lake Tahoe and Mexico. This is not to say there aren't recognizably dark noir scenes, but again, as in Hitchcock, the darkness emanates mainly from within the characters. This gives even a scene shot on a bright afternoon at a woodland river an atmosphere of bleakness and horror when a fishing trip ends in a gruesome murder. It also shows the limits of Jeff's world. Finished with Kathy, he falls in love with a sweet girl from the town where he's been hiding, but while most of their scenes together are shot during the day in natural locations, it's clear from their nervous, almost desperate exchanges that there are stronger, darker forces that will prevent them from ever coming together. So just an interesting read there on the choice to shoot a lot of daytime scenes here. And then as you were talking about, just as far as Mitchum's approach, that's a little different. Here we have a laid-back, laconic, low-key speech-delivering guy, a sleepy-eyed, kind of coolly detached character or actor, if you will. And many other noir male leads, as you were laying out earlier, often private eyes, are, faster patter kind of characters, harder edge, tougher, more violent perhaps, more alert, more attentive. I think you got to credit Mitchum with infusing this new casual style and attitude to this noir anti-hero archetype, although he is kind of invoking a little Bogart to me from time to time, just in his nonchalance a bit. But yeah, what's your take here? Just I wanted to finish the thought on Mitchum and what he brings to this role.
I agree with what you're saying, and I just think that he was so far ahead of his time.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that one of the benefits you see of this casting is that these three main players all work at a different pace. They all have a little something different going on. And I think the combination of Mitchum and Kirk Douglas as rivals, just everything about the way their motors run as actors puts them in a perfect conflict, because Mitchum is this I'm tough and I don't have to show it kind of thing. And when you see their initial scene together, Mitchum is almost sleeping in the chair opposite Kirk Douglas. He's sitting at his big opulent desk, and he couldn't be slouched down any lower in that chair, saying, the classic "baby, I don't care." He exemplifies that with his posture throughout the movie. But Douglas, by contrast, is this super keyed up, on edge character,
Absolutely.
and the two rhythms play beautifully together. The scene where Douglas shows up unexpectedly in Mexico, and he has the squeaky shoes and all that. It's fantastic. These two guys are great together, and you can tell that there was an actual competition between them.
Yeah, absolutely. That resonates. And I was listening to the audio commentary on the Blu-ray of this movie. James Orsini does a great job commenting. He describes Mitchum in this role as having a fatalistic and stoic quality, which stands in contrast to the slick or aggressive style of Douglas as wit. But I also want to credit Mitchum as he exudes this unforced sexual magnetism. I think that beauty's in the eye of the beholder, and I'm not a female, but you could just tell. He's a sexy dude.
Oh, God, yes.
I'm not saying Bogart and some of these other contemporary noir anti-hero leads are not sexy, but he's got the chiseled features, he's got the stature and the size, and of course the cool attitude. It all combines to make him a very sexy character.
I agree 100%, but also don't take it from me. I can tell you after 20 some odd years of doing this and showing noir films and everything, that Robert Mitchum exudes this sexual magnetism you're talking
Yes.
about, that transcends generations. I mean, I know a lot of women today and guys who are completely enamored of Mitchum's whole persona.
Oh, I'll bet.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that, Eric, because when I was younger and just starting to watch these movies, I became a real Robert Mitchum fan, And we had this, some of my friends and I had this little slogan called WWMD. What would Mitchum do? Because that was sort of like, it has to be the coolest response to anything would be whatever Mitchum would do, right? Which is kind of interesting given how often he ends up dead in these film noir movies.
Oh, this is true.
He's obviously doing the wrong thing at some point.
Yeah, it's almost cooler to end up dead than to survive these kind of stories, right?
There you go.
It adds to the legend.
Well, we know in real life how long a run the guy had and how he went out on his own terms and all that stuff. So
yeah, even showing up on Saturday Night Live. Do you remember the appearance?
I
with
certainly
Jane Grey?
do. I certainly do. Yeah. And I also want to just mention Jane's performance in this movie is really fantastic. And she always said, Jacques Tourneur just directed her so simply. He said, first half of the movie, big eyes. Second half of the movie, no big eyes, And he, was very French. And he said, he kept saying, I want you to be impulsive, impulsive, impulsive. And Jane was like, I didn't understand what he was saying,
Yeah, interpret, please. What does that mean, Eddie?
Impassive. Impulsive, impulsive. And she said that was like all she needed was this very, very simple direction.
Nice.
But she's the classic femme fatale because of the way you never can read her. Is she being honest now, or is this just more manipulation?
Yeah, I mean, you really have to see it through Jeff's eyes because we're following his story, and we need to understand why he would get sucked into her vortex time and again. And of course, toward the end, he's kind of playing her, right? But he's learned, he's wised up, but there's still that allure that is hard to ignore from Jeff's perspective.
Yeah, but it doesn't save him,
No.
though, at the end.
He's a doomed character, no question. I love how Roger Ebert talked about this movie, especially the smoking scenes. He said that few movies use smoking as well as this one. In their scenes together, it would be fair to say that Mitchum and Douglas smoke at each other in a sublimated form of fencing. I love that there. And, almost all classic noirs feature characters smoking, but this one, it seems to be trying to set records for how many coffin nails can be lit up and sucked in a 90-minute flick. Smoking becomes this form of sparring, as Ebert was saying. Can you think of another noir that has as many smoking scenes?
Well, it might be Double Indemnity just because they make such a big deal out of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's that great shot of Stanwyck lighting her cigarette in profile is very memorable. And of course, there's the whole gag with Fred McMurray, with the lighting of the cigar and stuff. But I completely agree. This movie cracks me up because, I always say it would be the drinking game of every time somebody lights up a cigarette and out of the past, have a jolt. You'd be drunk halfway in, no question about it. And I also love one of my favorite shots in noir is, just the scene itself is so fantastic. When Jeff and his partner Fisher get into that fist fight in the cabin in front of Kathy, and it's so beautifully photographed, and the sounds of them, just punching each other in the chin impossibly. It's an impossible fight scene because neither of those two guys would be standing at all after so many direct hits. But then at the end of the scene, after she kills Fisher, Mitchum, his response is to just light a cigarette.
Exactly. And he immediately lights up a Lucky, even after the tensest of situations. You cite that one, but then you think of also when he steals the tax files. He knocks the guy out, steals the tax files, and he lights up.
And he lights up a cigarette.
He's got nerves of steel, right? Ice water in his veins. So I mean, it's beautiful shorthand, again, for this is the toughest.
I'm glad, Eric, that you mentioned that scene where he steals the files, because that's the one where that they are aware of how funny it all is.
It really is.
Because they really do say, and he goes, and then I leave, right? And then you can just hear Tenor go, no, stop and light a cigarette,
Right.
and then leave the office.
It's comical. But considering all the double crosses and doppelgangers, affidavits and tax documents and blackmailing and bluffing in the second half of this story, Eddie, there's a lot to keep track of, right? So does this film get too complicated and, let's say, criminally clever for its own good? Should viewers try to keep up with the chess games being played here, or should they maybe adopt the same approach one might take with The Big Sleep, where the machinations of the plot should be regarded as less important than maybe the film's look, characters, and vibe?
I know what you're suggesting, and I would say, to me, watching these films, the plot is never paramount.
Yeah.
But I don't think the plot is unnecessarily complicated.
Okay.
It's the way it's rendered. They're basically saying, the plot is secondary to the dynamics of these three characters. And it's apparent that Whit Sterling uses all of this stuff in the second half of the movie, all of his tax situations, steal these files. I don't want the government to know what I'm up to,
Yeah.
It is all just a way to get Jeff back in his orbit so that he can torture him.
Makes sense.
That's what irks Whit, is that what if she really does love this guy more than me? And so he's going to bring them all together so that he can own them. I mean, this is not the only noir film in which this dynamic plays out. I also think that it's interesting because Jeff is clearly a more simple guy, and all of that complication of the plot in the second half of the movie is just contrasting Whit and Jeff. Jeff runs a service station. Whit has to deal with all these tax problems and all this stuff, the travails of being a legitimate gangster. And so I find all that stuff it bolsters the characters.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So I don't get bogged down in
Right.
like, what did Leonard Eels actually do, and how did he get this and that? And it's like, that doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, to me, I mean, you could disagree, but I've learned to regard the tax papers, the affidavit, even Eel's missing body as Hitchcockian MacGuffins, objects that propel the characters and the plot, but are relatively insignificant to the audience. In other words, to me, I don't think we should care too much about them or how they are intricately enmeshed in the story. It's what you were saying. It's all about getting Whit and Jeff back together, or Kathy and Jeff back together.
Of course, and then of course Whit is going to use him to get the papers that he needs and frame him simultaneously to take him out of the picture.
Sure.
And then Jeff, who is a little smarter than Whit realizes, tips to the frame up and screws it up, louses it up. So.
Right. So what's the moral of the story here? Are there any themes or messages woven into Out of the Past that you'd like to point out?
Boy, that's
Loaded question.
That's a good one. Generally in film noir, the thing that I find most appealing about it is when they aren't moralizing so much, but they're just showing you what happens to these characters who give in to their worst impulses, right? And then the story just plays out. Invariably, it ends tragically, and I can call these tales of karma. He should have been on the up and up.
Yeah.
Jeff should have done the job and walked away and leave it alone, But that's precisely what noir is not. I mean, all of these films are about the moment where people realize, I'm about to do a very bad thing. And then they do it.
Yep.
And then they do it, right? And that's what makes these movies so entertaining. And I don't know if the moral of the story goes beyond that it's just showing you what happens when people behave on their worst instincts.
Yeah, it's a fair reading. But if you'll humor me, I'll give you a few things to chew on here.
Of course,
so, I mean,
of course.
Some of these are obvious, but the inability to escape one's past or fate, I mean, it's right there in the title.
Of course.
The whole story is set in motion by Whit's henchmen finding Jeff, dragging him back to dangerous people and locations from his past. And even though all three main characters are on the lam, they can't outrun their previous transgressions and crimes. They lead these duplicitous double lives, but their true natures and identities ultimately emerge leading to their downfall. I think hand in hand with that is a possible theme of repeating past mistakes, because we see both Jeff and Kathy repeat certain actions that they will later come to regret or that prove futile. So as Exhibit A, Jeff conspires or pretends to conspire with Kathy against Whit multiple times. Kathy shoots Whit and then shoots him again later. After Jeff and Kathy deceive Whit, Jeff returns to Whit twice before the end of the story. And Jeff rendezvous with Anne twice, but they still don't end up together. So it's almost a lesson in futility, although by the end you think that maybe she's learned that Jeff, he's worth getting over and moving on with her life. But another reading is, of course, a doomed love triangle. You have Jeff, Kathy, and Whit. They're all bound together, fated to fall, you could argue. Debatably, however, the more fascinating relationship, we were talking about this a few moments ago, upon closer inspection, I think the more interesting dynamic and relationship is between Jeff and Whit, because, well, what do they have in common? The same femme fatale woman, a scathing hatred for each other. They have this kind of private code they each abide by, and maybe a sardonic or pessimistic worldview. So doomed love triangle, I think, emerges as well. You can make a case fate, doomed destiny is strongly at play here. Interestingly, Jeff proceeds in getting involved with Kathy and Whit and re-involving himself with them, despite being aware that he's being double-crossed and framed. And I understand that some of this is he's got to get himself unframed. They've kind of forced his hand, but then he forces their hand. So, but it does suggest to me that he can't help himself because of what? Because of Kathy's magnetism and perhaps this inherent fatal flaw in Jeff for that. You think about disloyalty, duplicity. One of the statements of the movie, Eddie, is that duplicity and disloyalty are irredeemable mortal sins, perhaps far worse than murder or theft or blackmail or other crimes committed by these characters, because betrayal ultimately leads to the death of the three leads, Jeff, Kathy, and Whit. And moral ambiguity is rich and thick in here. I'm going to quote Ebert again, who said, "The movie's final scene between the hometown girl, Anne, and Jimmy, Jeff's hired kid at the gas station, reflects the moral murkiness of the film with its quiet ambiguity. As Jimmy answers Anne's question, is he telling her what he believes, what he thinks she wants to believe, or what he thinks it will be best for her to believe?" Now, most people, I think if you were to poll them, they'd say he's lying to her because he knows that Jeff would want her to move on with her life. Do you agree with that reading?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear, although Ebert said maybe there's room for doubt, and I guess it's up to you to interpret.
It's like a little test at the end of the film for people, what's your interpretation of this?
Exactly.
I always felt that it was a way of setting her free so she could get on with her life and just forget about him, forget about Jeff. It's one of my favorite endings in film noir for those very reasons, that it's just a beautiful little grace note at the end of the film, and from out of the past, because it's like Jeff communicating even though he's dead at the end of the film is
it's
strong.
great.
It's good.
No question about it. All right, Eddie, this is a 75th birthday celebration. It's customary to give presents on birthdays, except every episode I talk with my guests and I say that it's the fans who continue to get the gifts. So what is Out of the Past's greatest gift to viewers?
It is the epitome of noir style. And since it really is the style of these that keeps them so popular generations later, I think that that's what it is. This is the exemplar of high noir style. It has become something that's so much a part of American culture, whereas I think America used to, popular entertainment and popular mythology revolved around Westerns and all that kind of stuff. I think now it sort of revolves around noir and detective stories and all this kind of stuff. And I think that this being just an incredible example of the form, that's what it brings to people today. That's the gift it bestows upon them, as being the ultimate example of noir style.
Hear, hear. Totally second those sentiments. So for my part, I believe one of this movie's greatest gifts is that it's a terrific story, terrifically told, both visually and verbally. It's true that the plot, particularly in the second half, becomes maybe a little more complicated, especially, as we said, those double crosses, those schemes, they kind of intersect, they diverge. But what, to me, helps make it stand tall among other works in this genre is the way that Out of the Past is supremely structured as a then and now story, featuring the extended and voiceover narrated flashback comprising Part 1, contrasting with present-day 1947 in Part 2, wherein the characters are continually haunted by the specter of the past. I just love that structure. Greatest gift number 2 is unquestionably, for me, Kathy Moffat. Quite possibly the sultriest, the most sinister femme fatale of them all. Yes, you got Phyllis Dietrichson from Double Indemnity. She remains the kind of cold-hearted queen against whom all other noir spider women maybe are measured. But Kathy notches a higher body count of victims. She wields her duplicitous charms with more skill and dexterity. So, I acknowledge that beauty, again, it's in the eye of the beholder, but I think like Rita Hayworth and Gilda, like Ava Gardner and The Killers, I contend that Jane Greer is drop-dead gorgeous. She retains this timeless allure and sensuousness 75 years later that makes me believe why Jeff would fall prey to her. So, great casting there. And lastly, greatest gift number 3. It's that trench coat tough talk mouthed by these streetwise personalities, these wisecracking witticisms, rapid-fire repartee you were talking about, delivered with a rhythm, a cadence, and a timing that can be relished by new generations as priceless pulp poetry. Out of the past, it just boasts some of the most stylized and sarcastically savory banter ever heard in a 1940s film, or any film for that matter. I submit to the jury the following exhibits. What was left of the day went away like a pack of cigarettes you smoked. You're like the leaf that blows from one gutter to another. I mean, this stuff is gold. It speaks for itself. Do you always go around leaving your fingerprints on a girl's shoulders? Joe couldn't find a prayer in the Bible. And my favorite, Eddie, a dame with a rod is like a guy with a knitting needle. That's just brilliant. Great stuff.
Let's give credit to Frank Fenton, who wrote virtually all of Mitchum's voiceover dialogue in the film.
So, Eddie, what's coming up on Noir Alley and TCM? And do you have anything else in the works that you'd like listeners to know about?
Oh, my goodness. There's quite a bit. I've recorded all my shows through the end of the year. So I'm right now in the process of putting together a program for 2023 on Noir Alley. And I'm kind of excited because I don't think there's any, and it's all new stuff.
Okay.
There's no repeats or anything. And then there's also been talk about how we may extend Noir Alley across international borders and have a little adjacent show once a month where I'm showing foreign language noir.
Wow.
Because whenever I show a foreign language movie on Noir Alley, some people love it. Other people I don't want to read subtitles. So I thought, well, what we'll do is we'll see if we can do like an annex to Noir Alley where it's just foreign language noir. So that is in the works as well.
Very exciting.
And then I got some other surprises, some book projects and things coming up. I'll abstain from talking about it too much now, but have me back on, Eric, and I'll tell you about it.
Yeah, no worries. Absolutely. When they're gelled and ready, we could talk more about that. You also have a cruise coming up, right?
I do. The TCM Classic Cruise, which I enjoy very much. It's great fun. I'm still waiting for the body to show up on the cruise to just make it perfect,
That would be great, like dinner theater, right?
and precisely. Next year, when we go back to doing live film festivals, it will be the 20th anniversary of the Noir City Film Festival that I do in San Francisco.
Wow.
Interestingly, it is the 75th anniversary of every movie made in 1948. So,
yes, it is.
As I'm sure you've already been plotting. So I'm excited about that because my festival will be nothing but film noir movies from 1948 because it's the 75th anniversary of every single one.
Yeah, and that was a pivotal year, of course, in noir and a lot of other genres, for that matter, in classic Hollywood. So
exactly.
A lot of exciting things to look forward to there. Terrific, Eddie. Well, this was a real treat talking to you. Thank you again for taking the time, a deep dive with us to discuss the 75th anniversary of Out of the Past, one of the fantastic film noirs in the canon.
Thanks so much, Eric. I really appreciate your having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Have a wonderful day, Eddie.
Okay, take care.
Now, there is a man who knows how to talk noir. Thank you, Eddie, for being a fan of our show and coming back to Cineversary for an extended chunk of time. We appreciate everything you do and your commitment to keeping classic movies relevant. It's time again for Standing Ovations. This is where I give a shout out to a film, website, podcast, book, television program, or other work that I think would be of interest to classic film lovers just like you. For September, I've got a boatload of praise for TCM's Classic Cruise. This is billed as a one-of-a-kind movie experience at sea, which sails November 12th through the 17th this year. Yep, only a couple of months away, in the form of an ocean liner extraordinaire known as the Disney Dream. Departing from Miami, the ship travels to 2 Cayman Islands on its 5-day journey, but the real fun, it's going to be had on board because several key celebrities are slated to participate in planned presentations, interviews, and events. I'm looking at the roster here. You've got Richard Dreyfuss, Chevy Chase, entertainers like Lainey Kazan, Deanna Martin, and Pat Boone. There's world-renowned fashion designer Bob Mackie. I see actress Sean Young has signed up. There's several others as well. And you've also got all 5 TCM hosts who will be present. Now, that includes Ben Mankiewicz, Eddie Muller, Alicia Malone, Jacqueline Stewart, and Dave Karger. That sounds even better than The Love Boat. Remember that show? Well, it sounds like the Love Movies boat, right? So, yep, quite a lineup for fans of vintage movies, and looks like an exciting opportunity to maybe rub elbows with some big personalities. But I'm told when I called in that reservations are going quickly, so you might want to jump on this pronto if you are interested. As a side note, my wife and I were really eager to attend this cruise ourselves, but unfortunately the dates did not work for us. But for full details, including availability, pricing, amenities, and more, go visit tcmcruise.com. Like what you hear on Cineversary? We'd love to get your feedback. Whether you want to nominate a movie for a future anniversary episode, provide comments, or just have a question, get a hold of us at cineversegroup@gmail.com. That's CINEVERSE group@gmail.com. Also, you can really help our show grow by spreading the good word about the Cineversary podcast to your friends and loved ones. Even better, please leave a positive online review and rating, which significantly helps us get discovered by new listeners. So if you use Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or CastBox, simply search for the Cineversary page, look for a link that says something like ratings or reviews, click that, and leave that rating or review. While you're at it, take a moment to like us on Facebook, too. And if you'd like to go an extra step and help keep our show ad-free, consider making a donation to the Cineversary podcast by visiting tinyurl.com/donate Cineversary. We really appreciate your support. Lastly, we encourage you to visit cineversegroup.com. That's the portal for my private film discussion group I launched back in 2005, where you can hear recordings of our group discussions and read in-depth analyses about the different movies we study. Looking ahead to next month, we would be remiss if we didn't schedule something downright spooky for Halloween season, right? Well, no worries there, because for October, we will pay homage to one of the most critically acclaimed and revered horror films of them all, and quite possibly the best vampire movie ever made. It is F.W. Murnau's ageless masterpiece of the macabre, Nosferatu, which celebrates a 100th anniversary in 2022. Until next time, this is your humble host, Eric Martin, reminding you to butter up that popcorn, live a big screen surround sound life, and continue to cherish those classic movies because they're not getting older, they're getting better. Thanks as ever for giving us a listen.